Welcome to Ruined by the Internet. I'm Gareth King. Today we're asking, has the internet ruined the human identity? It promised a world of self-expression and connection, but instead, it's encouraged us to create performative versions of ourselves, curated by algorithms and validated by likes. To help us find the reality, we're joined by Colin Corby, digital detox coach, technologist, and CEO of Technology Wellbeing. Colin, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very much looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. But before we get into it, can you tell us a bit about the work that you do and the journey that's led you to this point?
So I'll try and keep it short. When I was in my mid-30s, I had a fantastic job in technology, lots of world firsts, great people to work with, but I was suffering from stress. So what was happening is the heart rate went up and up and up until I started to see stars and I passed out a few times at work. So loads of tests. At the time, they said inconclusive results. So I thought, well, what am I going to do? Because I've got to do something. So I remember being a good swimmer because I live near the water. And so I thought, I better get myself fit then. So I went swimming, couple of lengths, absolutely wrecked. It was a tipping point. I had to do something. So I persevered with the swimming. I got fitter. I took lessons to learn all the strokes. I started racing, started triathlon. To cut a long story short, I ended up doing 4 Ironman triathlons and winning county titles in swimming and stuff like that.
Wow.
But it was in doing the Ironman, I just realized that how you talk to yourself can change the way that you think and change what you can do. That fascinated me. So the psychology aspect started to set in. And then I got the opportunity much later on to leave the corporate world. And I was going for some interviews and 1 or 2 other things. And I was being guided by a coach. And I said, you know what? I don't really want to do this. I said, I love technology. I love sport and the thing about the mind. And why am I on my iPhone so much? And I researched that. And I thought, yeah, I can just smash all of the 3 things together and, work out what's going on, but actually be able to coach, give talks, help other people.
You've previously spoken at TEDx around the human identity and the effects of technology and kind of our online selves and our true selves. Do you think that our online selves and our offline selves, do you think the line between those is so much more blurred these days? Do people really realize that they're even curating an online identity, or do they just see it as an extension of themselves?
I think that most people now must curate their online presence because we've had it long enough. So I curate my online presence. I use it mostly for work activities and very little for personal activities. And it's curated. So I think everybody knows that it's curated. A lot of people now realize that actually it's self-censorship.
Right.
Because there's a record. Every website you've ever been, everything you've ever purchased, every message you've ever sent, every post you've ever sent is recorded as online memories. So we basically self-censorship. So there's a whole host of things I would never say online as if I was in the real world with people. So self-censorship. Now, we're quite lucky in the sense that we can observe what's happening in China, and that has a very interesting way of self-censorship. Whereas we're being influenced by predominantly the US. In preparing for this talk, I said, well, we're going to talk about the internet, and then we're going to talk about our identity. So if we look at the internet first, well, what is it? Well, the internet today isn't what it was last year or the year before or the year before. The internet today has a large percentage of non-human content. The internet is an artificial construct. It's the most complex thing humans have ever created, but it's a facsimile of the real world.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that was kind of where I was just heading towards with the reference to the lines blurring. As you said, that being the facsimile of the real world. I can remember a time there was no internet. And so it was a thing that came into my life. My identity was an offline identity that the internet got added into at the time. And then I think over time, as it's kind of become so much more all-encompassing across everything, as you said there, depending on where you are online or what you're doing, people are self-censoring and curating like a different version of their identity. So I'd love for us to get into how maintaining all of those different versions of your offline identity in an online space can either A, blur together, or B, become such a huge part of your identity that the offline part is either equal or less than the sum of those parts. So there's a lot to kind of get into there.
Yeah. So the thing to say is that who you are, who I am, has got two components. One is who other people believe we are. So these multiple curated personas of ourselves, that's how other people are perceiving us in the online world. That's how governments perceive us, job search companies, algorithms. The other thing to think about is that there's an infinite amount of information on the internet, more than we can possibly access. And we're being fed feeds, curated feeds from all the different apps and algorithms. So they shape what we experience on the internet. Now, if we come down to ourselves, evolution thought it wise for biological animals to have this conscious experience of self. We experience the now and we predict the future based on all of our experiences. So if most of our experiences are online, then those experiences are shaping who we are. And if, like a lot of people, if they spend predominantly most of their time online, then most of the experiences are online, and that shapes who they are more so than when you switch off online, you go out for a beer with mates. You have a good laugh, or you play a sport, or you do something in, I can call it the real world, but we have a perception of the real world. So what I'm interested in doing is getting that balance of getting people to have more human contact so they can hang on to who they are. But we know in a non-internet world, we were a different person at work to who we were in a sports club, who we were down the pub, who we are to our families. So that part of it isn't new.
No, absolutely. And I think you touched on something there around, if you're predominantly experiencing the online or the digital world, those experiences are shaping who you are both online and then beyond. But one thing I'd love to kind of get into about that is we know that people are curating their online selves. And so, everybody knows that there's a lot of discourse around mental health problems that might come out of social media, whether it's people getting body image issues and things like that, jealousy about it seems like everyone else has a perfect life, etc. And we know that that's because you're only seeing everyone else's highlight reel. So if you're taking in that their identity is this most perfect, picture perfect life, everything seems flawless, that's obviously going to give you some feelings of inadequacy in the online space that are then going to translate into the offline space potentially. But how do you think that likes and shares became such an important and valued form of digital currency for our self-worth?
So at the root of it is we're social animals. Part of the success of Homo sapiens is that we're social animals. That's a safety thing, a sense of safety. And within a group, everybody is always trying to pitch themselves where they fit into that group, how high they are, what's your standing, and those sorts of things. And those instincts, that social behavior that we've all got, have migrated to the internet, and it's migrated to all the likes. So particularly as you get older, you get less worried about it. But
yeah, of course.
When you're young, you're worried about everything.
Yeah.
But if you're missing the physical contact with friends, the going out and the real world activities, and if you're focused solely on this, then if people don't like you, then that has serious consequences, because that makes you feel instinctively unsafe, because we're social animals. We need to be liked. We need to have a social standing. And so it's just migrated to the internet, and it has horrific implications for people that are very sensitive to that.
Yeah. Look, that's perfect there. The way that you've summed it up, as it's kind of a biological thing that's, instead of playing out in that primal structure where you might have had, I don't know, two lions or something fighting, and that's their competition, or, we know animals do mating rituals and things like that. But in the online space, as you've called out, you don't need to actually be anything other than what you are in that one little moment, which I can imagine is just fragmenting people's identities beyond all sorts of repair.
I heard at schools, and you have a career talk at school, what do you want to be? An influencer.
Yeah. It's something interesting in there too, because I think that humans love influence, and no matter what we're doing, as you said, even in your peer group, there's always that leader of the group, and everyone kind of settles into their structure and the hierarchy offline. And I think that the influencer is just kind of a globally reaching, very easy way to kind of sort and section yourself into different things on just a crazy scale that we've never seen before. So
the other interesting thing is, in the real world, if you want to be a sports person, a musician, an academic, whatever it is, it's hard work. It's a lot of hard work. Everything to do with technology is about giving the appearance of everything being easy. So if you see the influencers and you see this perfect world that they have, and then you think, oh, I could be that. All I need to do is tweak my videos or curate myself a little bit more, or find a niche, or just be lucky. But the sad thing is, a lot of influencers suffer enormous mental health issues, because once they're on the treadmill, they then have to carry on finding content. I recently had a holiday in Italy, and we went by the lakes, and there were so many young people who were there purely to take the Instagram shots and
totally
shot clips.
Yeah, look, I've seen it. I've been out for nice dinners with my fiance, and we're so keen just to get this delicious food and taste it. And we've seen tables next to us of people younger than us, and with kind of mini tripods and doing full shoots and things around the food, that I'm thinking, oh my God, this incredibly amazing tasting stuff is just getting cold, and you're not even eating it. And that, like you said, it's just all about the pictures. And I think for me, being a little bit older than growing up just into that world as a natural thing, I don't see the appeal in it, and I would almost feel a little bit awkward giving myself an identity like that, a digital identity. But I guess if you're doing that to a community or followers who are all into that kind of thing, you could see how that performance of a self in the digital space could influence our own core beliefs and sense of self. As you said, the demand to keep doing that, you may feel that becomes who you are, not just this very special, curated, and I don't want to say fake, because it's real people doing it, but it's not a real representation of the whole you. How do you think that just so much emphasis on the influence side of ourselves in the digital space, how is that affecting people offline? Have you seen anything around how it affects those influencers, as you said, when they're on the treadmill trying to come up with content? How is it changing people?
So what I've seen with influencers is the stress. So the increase in stress of always having to perform. And quite often an influencer feels so stressed and burnt out that they go offline for a while and then they come back. So there's a burnout associated with that. In the same way, there's burnout associated with working all hours in our jobs and things. But there's a big difference. You see, you and I, because we're biological animals, our sense of self is a biological sense of self. It involves the body, it involves the mind, it involves all of our senses and emotions. Whereas on the internet, it's a facsimile. So they're digitized images, digitized things, but it's a very flat, two-dimensional representation in many ways. So in a sense, there's this mismatch between who we are as biological animals and this sort of two-dimensional internet version of ourselves.
Yeah. So can you just explain a little bit about what the most common forms that mismatch might take?
Well, I'm fascinated because I love technology, and I'm fascinated by where it's going and problems associated with it. I'm not in favor of the dead internet theory. The dead internet theory is that as soon as something has so much machine content that we stop using. I don't think that will ever happen. But there's this arms race. And one of the biggest problems is it's very, very difficult to prove that you're human online.
Right.
Because because the way technology has advanced, it's so easy if you have the right resources, processing resources and training models to create clones of people. Now, in the TEDx talk that I did a couple of years ago now, are we losing our identity technology? Because we're outsourcing our knowledge and skills to technology. Now, at the simple level, sat nav, turn left, turn right, we get somewhere. We don't know how we got there, and we probably couldn't get there again without the sat nav. With AI, it can now write our emails. It can do our presentations. It can read reports. It can do lots of things. And there are lots of CEOs in the US, technology companies, who are saying, well, okay, the internet's so complex. What you need is an AI personal assistant who can be you online. Now, that's got lots of privacy problems associated with it at the moment. But so if I was talking to you online in, let's say, 10, 15 years' time, it might be your AI agent acting on your behalf and my agent acting on my behalf. And so that's going to change the picture of who we are again, because technology has moved on.
Oh, that's a great tangent that we've headed down now. Is as we've started off talking about how the internet and the digital world has affected the biological human identity, and as we've discussed over time, as people get more and more digital, as their identity demands more time online in that space, as you've raised now, with the sophistication constantly increasing about what we can fake and pretend and outsource, it seems like the next evolution that we should be, we can discuss now is what happens to the digital identity or the digital human identity now that these large language models and agentic AI and generative tools come about. Where is this going to go, Colin, do you think?
So there's lots of things that I can't control. So I'm a firm believer in saying, well, okay, what is it I can control? And how can I communicate that to other people? So I come from a sustainability. So you've got to be online, but you've got to be human as well. And the reason why I've sort of homed in on digital detox athlete is that because it gets across, we all know an athlete has to do all the right things biologically to perform at their best. They have to get enough sleep, eat the right food, but also this idea that things take effort and take time. So if we wanted to create a new, digital detox habit, we're going to have to spend, some research suggests 66 days to create a new habit, but it could be as long as 250 perhaps, or shorter, depending on complexity. So that's why I've gone, it's this effort. Everything we do in the real world takes effort. Human relationships and human connection, really, really important. Lots of studies have shown that although we might be the most connected people in the world online, it's not the same thing. It's still at a superficial level. It doesn't replace human connection. So hence, I'm trying to get people offline to balance out their time online. So there's biological animals, they can survive.
You said something there about almost relying too much on the online space. And we've seen with large language models, what happens when people get so reliant on a false reality that's not even a person, that they can't handle it not being there. Do you know what I mean? Like how does somebody detox from that?
There was a terrible thing reported a while ago that one of the tech companies, US tech companies, had this idea of creating a best friend for children, an AI best friend for children. And I think it was shot down very quickly.
Yeah, it's so dystopian.
Yeah, but it takes us away from our humanity. We're very, very complex animals. We need all of the things around us. If you take some of them away, then for some people, they might come unhinged. It might be really important. Whereas for other people, they'll be fine with it. We survive by being different from each other. So we need all of those differences, and we need that complexity, because at the end of the day, evolution has given us the task. If we want to survive, we have to survive in this real world that's changing all the time. We can't possibly know everything about it. We just have to know enough about the world in order to be able to sigh. The past for us isn't about remembering what happened in the past. Luckily for me, all the bad things I've done in the past, all the people I've upset, all the hateful things I've said is not online.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely.
But the past is about helping us in the future, survive in the future. Whereas online, it's just a straight record of what happened, as if you're the same person 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And it's very easy to be a prisoner to that.
No, for sure. And you said something there around there not being a record of a lot of the stupid things that you've done. And look, I'm the same, and I've had so many conversations with people my age about the exact same thing. And everybody seems to get to the same conclusion, which is I'm so glad smartphones and everything wasn't around when we were that age. And it's not like, committing heinous crimes and things like that, but it's just we've seen that there's so much risk, and when everything's being documented at every given moment, could have substantial effects on your life that you, of course, obviously have not meant it to be. What would you say the psychological toll of knowing, like if you're a young person now, you don't really know a life before internet. It's just a thing, like it's just part of life. What kind of psychological toll that puts on somebody knowing that there is that unerasable record of your past that, as you said, you can never escape from. Like it's always part of you. You can't kind of reinvent yourself somewhere else and do something else.
Well, I mean, there's been lots of cases where something a child would have said, as defined in Australia or the UK, has affected their job prospects. With children, the brain is growing and it grows in certain stages. But some of the cognitive skills of self-regulation and control are some of the last things that children and young adults get. And it goes into the 20s. So if you imagine then you're in a family and every bad thing you did at home, someone was spilling the beans to all your friends, every word you said. I mean, that amount of pressure is incredible, isn't it?
Unreal.
Children have got to be children because we learn by mistakes. And the culture that I grew up in is certainly not acceptable today.
No, for sure. And I think that we could even say that about this point right now that we're speaking. But you said something a couple of minutes ago as well around potentially losing bits of ourselves, whether it's psychologically or emotionally. The more we're kind of interacting with, whether it's a large language model or a stranger online. We know that if you're encountering a stranger offline, you still recognize them as a person, Whereas you said a couple of minutes ago, they're just this kind of flat 2D representation of who knows what it is. Like, I don't know, someone might have a picture of a tree instead of them. So you actually are just talking to a screen or interacting with a screen, which I can imagine it doesn't require as much empathy and any of those human emotions that form part of your real person identity. Do you think, or over the time that you've been, I guess, looking into and exploring this space, have you seen us becoming less empathetic as a society now that we're so used to interacting with pixels rather than strangers?
Those skills about emotions and those things, they're slower skills. So if you read a book or if you talk to a person, you've got enough time for those feelings. So we've got mirror neurons. So when I'm talking to you, to try and understand what it is you're saying in the fullest sense, I've taken all the information, the way that you're saying something, the intonation, your facial expressions. If it's a face-to-face, I get lots of other feelings, the way you're standing, those sort of things. And in order for me to understand it, I have to almost like mirror some of those things to understand what you're really feeling. Are you upset? Are you happy? Is there something you're not saying? So then you come online and it's very, very superficial. And so we make snap judgments. So whether or not we're talking to a bot, an AI bot, or a real person, we're projecting the first level of humanity onto them. But we're not going into the emotion. That's why people can immediately react to someone says something about some bad thing that's happened. And we're outraged. Instantly, we're outraged. But it might be 20 years old that thing happened. We've got no sense. Our critical thinking hasn't engaged.
Yeah, I mean, that is interesting because I think, as we touched on a little while ago, around that kind of social currency. And I think that I'm an outraged person by this thing, whatever it is, whoever you are. You might have seen something and you can easily just move past it in 3 seconds, but signaling that you're either outraged or like so in love with this thing, it's almost, as we go back to formulating this identity as the angry person or the super pleased person, which is, again, curating online. That's not even your real identity.
Yeah, or proving that we believe in this thing as opposed to that thing.
Yeah.
And having to demonstrate it.
Yeah. Look, it's so interesting to think about. And as you said, those algorithms are designed to keep you embracing, let's say, the outrage or the anger part of your identity. And then maybe spending enough time looking at that, you will become that person offline. But you've mentioned now around AI, and I'd love for us to kind of dig around with that a little bit. You're very aware of it, and I guess you've spent quite a bit of time thinking about where it goes from here. What personal and social implications for the human identity, whether it's offline or online, do you imagine that we need to be aware of due to where AI is now, and then also where it can potentially go?
Yeah, so I've already started talking about an AI detox.
Okay.
And it's different from a digital detox. Digital detox is where you go offline. An AI detox is something you can do online. If I go on ChatGPT and I say, look, I've created this post, can you suggest some improvements? ChatGPT are going to say, brilliant, you've done exceptionally well on this. Here are a few minor things. And I look at it and I think, oh, that's interesting, but that sounds really American.
Yeah.
So AI is creating the new average. So I experiment with it and I think, oh no, I can't do that as a British English speaker. And that's not something I would do. And it basically creates the same sort of thing, but it's always that, oh, you've done great type of thing. I think that we have to be very, very careful with AI. If you outsource too much to AI, and let's face it, big companies are basically using AI as the next step of digital transformation. And digital transformations ultimately are about removing people.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, making it less expensive. But if we personally rely too much on AI, then what are our skills as humans? So if you think about the future of work and the future of humans, it's a bit sad. All technology makes life easier for us. I mean, who would do the washing in the local stream anymore? Washing machines are fantastic. So we have to learn how to be biological animals. We have to go down the gym because we don't move about enough, or we have to go running, or we have to go walking. We have to learn about cooking from real vegetables and food, because all of a sudden processed foods seems to be a problem now. So for us to survive in the future, we have to focus more on being human and being humans together, because that's going to be what's left for us.
Yeah. Oh, you mentioned something there that I'd love for us to look at now, and it was around the role of AI in the workplace. And whether they're admitting to it or denying it, or whether something else is going on, we know that everybody right now is seeing it and feeling it and hearing about it as this kind of replacement for lower level tasks and people. Now, of course, as we know, this kind of technology increases in sophistication exponentially. So it's only a matter of time till it's going up the ranks, and then who knows it goes. I guess the point I wanted to look at through this was, we know that for so many people, a huge part of their identity is their job.
Yes.
And so if their employment, their purpose, or even their job or their title is removed thanks to technology, that feels like an even larger potential problem that technology is indirectly causing to somebody. Except the problem now is not just losing parts of yourself to online. You have lost a huge part of your offline self, and how that recovers if those avenues to replace it aren't there, thanks to AI.
It's interesting. Now, what we've got to say about AI is AI within certain fields where they're heavily bounded, like the medical field, image recognition, those sorts of things. Absolutely fantastic. They go through proper studies, field trials. The benefits are enormous, but not all AI is the same. A lot of people have identity. Who are you? Your title is your badge in life. Particularly in the US, you are that person. Unfortunately, in the US, you can be sacked at a moment's notice. It's not true in Europe and the UK, and certainly not in Australia. But it's very much that badge of who we are. So in a sense, there's a lot of hard work for people to actually be bigger than their job. Now, I've worked for a lot of technology companies and enjoyed working for a lot of technology companies. But my first company was British Telecom International. And I spent 19 years there, and I was institutionalized. It took me 2 years to actually reconnect with, who I was to be able to make a move. And that's going to affect a lot of people, because if you lose all those skills, then what have you got left? And so what an AI detox is about deciding what are the skills that you need personally as a professional, as a person, and then you need to practice. We work hard on something, problem solving, but we don't have the answer. And then all of a sudden, the next day after a sleep, or when we go for a run, the answer pops into our mind. That's because our unconscious has worked on all the assumptions and come up with it. But what if we don't have all of those knowledge and skills for it to work on? So our ability to be as good at problem solving and critical thinking is diminished if we don't practice those things. But all of this is hard work. All of this is hard work. And, it won't happen. It's not going to happen tomorrow. And we've got a tendency to take the easy option.
Oh, that's such an interesting paradox that you've just highlighted there around doing stuff, let's say the human way is hard work. And when you've got all these tools in front of you, giving you the super easy option, obviously it's super, super tempting. But as you said a little while ago too, like people are handing over more and more and more of themselves to technology and losing those parts of their identity. That what does happen when it's gone? Everyone's outsourced everything to technology. What do we have left? Like, how far can we go?
So I'm a fan of science fiction because I think science fiction works on sort of really weird ideas and sees how they go. One version of humanity is that we're not really very good at looking after ourselves. I mean, there's inequalities, there's wars, there's all of these other problems. One outcome is that at some point in the future, and we don't know when, the AI sort of farms us.
Yeah.
And we might be perfectly happy with whatever it does for us. It's a simpler life, and it's not a human life.
No. And I think that it takes me right back to certain biological beings have got that gift of sentience, being able to ponder what our station is, not only in life, but kind of in life itself. And then I think that, you look at the positive.
There is hope, because the current versions of AI, they calculate the past.
Yes.
They don't really know the relationship of all of those things in the past, and certainly the past can't predict the future. They have no concept of self, and therefore they have no real concept of the reality that they're in. It's not to say that at some point in the future they might, but they don't.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, like, how far off do you reckon we are till they get sophisticated enough to be aware of their own shortcomings and can kind of address that?
At the moment, the nuclear-powered data centers they've got planned in order to get enough processing power is on a trajectory where, climate change is going to be a real problem, more of a problem than it currently is. But every 6 months, approximately, there's something new happening, and you can't predict. There's this thing called general intelligence. You can't predict when it might happen. But I'm of the view that actually real intelligence is biological, and it's about existing in this world. And you mentioned it. The great thing about what humans can do, we can make a decision based on no information at all in this world. We'll go with something because we have to. That's the way we're designed. We can think about things that don't exist. We can think about future things. Now, it's all influenced by what we already know, but there are some marvelous thinkers who think that step beyond. And so as humans, the hope is that because we're in the real world and because that other world is a facsimile, then it's missing out. And I know a lot of the AI companies are now thinking about getting AI down into the robotic level so they can experience the real world, because they've run out of the internet data, human data to work on. And that data has been polluted by robotic data.
Yes, of course.
So future generations of large language models, as soon as you train yourself on yourself or previous versions of yourself, it all ends up in a mess somewhere. So there's a robotic shift in order to try and experience this world. So there's a little bit of hope and time for us.
Yeah, look, we'll definitely keep that hopeful mindset, I think. And you kind of alluded to something there, which was what sets us apart is that ability to take previous data sets and information, recognize patterns, put it all together essentially, and imagine something that may not exist. Now, as you've also said, and we've seen around these kind of AI tools, LLMs, whatever they are, they're just aggregating what exists. Potentially one day it gets to the point where it can imagine in I guess a biological way. I don't know. That would be a bit scary, because then where does that leave humans? But I guess the hopeful part of it as well is we do eventually get some sort of guardrails that rein this in a little bit and corral it into certain avenues, as you said, around medical and things like that could have much better positive outcomes for humanity.
Yeah, I'm going to have to be an optimist, because the alternative is not as good.
No, it's definitely not as good. As we could become, literal cyborgs with, tools in our minds and in our bodies and things. Like, what will a human identity look like into the future if that's the case?
So let's look at the positives first. There are a lot of people who, through no fault of their own, their bodies don't function in the same way that they would like them to. And the ability to have an implant, and this is the way it's being proposed, gives them the ability to, let's say, walk again, to do lots of wonderful things. And they're really, really great. This idea, though, and that's relatively simple because it uses the motor part of the brain. We have no idea what consciousness is, or, to be fair, how the brain works properly.
Yeah.
Now, we've got more idea than we had 10 years ago and 20 years ago. And in 10 years' time, we'll have more idea than now. But it's incredibly complex. A human brain takes about 1/millionth of the power of a supercomputer with roughly the same processing power.
Wow.
So a biological brain, and all animals' brains are doing something slightly different, but they're all potentially conscious beings, even down to the tiniest animals. So there isn't any way that will happen in a sort of a cyborg sense anytime soon. I always relate it to, I'm still waiting for self-driving cars, and that's been about for 20 years?
Oh, yeah. Look,
you try and do something really complicated.
Yeah, I tell you what, it's funny. I remember being a kid, and I don't know if they had it in the UK or not, but we had this show here. It was called Beyond 2000. And obviously it was before 2000 came, right? And it was hypothesizing what would happen after the year 2000. And I remember the intro, because I look it up on YouTube every now and again, and it will have like a robot, I think it's pushing a kid on a swing, so it's like the parents are now giving their playtime to a robot. But then there was the flying car, and some of the technology is long surpassed by now. But I think flying cars have been kind of imagined forever, haven't they?
Yeah, but flying taxis are just starting to get licenses now.
Really?
MIT in the US has got robots to run, which is quite complex. And there's that dog.
Oh, are we talking the Boston Dynamics stuff?
Yeah, the Boston Dynamics dog.
That's very scary.
As time goes on, the robotic things are happening. But the great thing about the future is that predicting timescales, as you say, from flying cars and all that sort of thing, is incredibly difficult. But in the internet, because it's an artificial construct and relatively simple one, then things can appear to move much faster because it's almost a controlled environment. Whereas in the real world, who knows what's really happening? I mean, we haven't even got to the bottom of quantum theory yet and how it shapes the physical world that we know. I grew up learning about electricity. Now I have to comprehend the fact that electrons probably exist within the outer shells of atoms, but we're using it. So we don't have to know everything. And there's tons of stuff that we don't know.
Yeah, look, that's a little bit above my my mental capacity to understand that stuff, but it sounds quite serious. But yeah, look, a lot to think about there on how our identity started, how they've been changed and affected through technology and where they could potentially go. And look, I think I'm going to be on the same camp as you. I want to be hopeful about this because, as you said, the alternative is too bad to think about. Just to finish up then, Colin, what's coming up for you and where can people follow what you're up to?
So as a digital detox coach, I'm going to say the internet because we all have to be online to live in this world. So the website is www.thedigitalDetoxCoach.com. If people would like, have a look at the TEDx talk, because the introduction of the TEDx talk is about imagine a possible future. And it was done a couple of years ago, but I was already familiar with AI before it sort of hit. And so you imagine a future, and then we end up is that actually it's about human sanctuaries at the end. So have a look at the TEDx, but all the other information's on the website.
Awesome. Colin, you've given us quite a lot to think about. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
For more info on what we've discussed today, check out the show notes. If you enjoyed this one, you can subscribe to Ruined by the Internet on your favourite podcast app and help spread the word by sharing this episode or leaving a review. I'm Gareth King. See you next time.